Adolf Eichmann, the notorious Nazi who escaped justice for 15 years before his trial brought global understanding to the term Holocaust. Under oath, Eichmann insisted he was a middle manager with no blood on his hands.
Dass ich nie einen Menschen getötet habe, dass ich nie einen Menschen erschlagen habe, dass ich nie einen Menschen geschlagen habe.
Is this the truth, or were his words all lies? Most people from my generation don't understand how over 70 years ago, a small group of Nazis could start a war that killed 60 million people. I want to find out, and to help me, I'm going to use playing cards. Today, they're used by both the military and law enforcement to help identify their targets. But nobody has ever put together a pack of cards for the most notorious group of killers in history. Working with experts, I want to know where each of these Nazis rank in the hierarchy of evil. My name is James Ellis. This is Hitler's Most Wanted. It is interesting weighing up the different sides of this. I find this is an extremely tough one because he played such an integral role to the Nazi genocide, but at the same time, because he was a cog in that machine, maybe he was replaceable.
What I find most interesting about Eichmann is the pedestrian nature to which he went about his work. To him, it was just automated. He went to work, he did his job, he went back home.
You have to remember, he wasn't a senior Nazi. That uniform is that of an SS lieutenant colonel. That's not that high. It's middle ranking.
When anti-Semitic measures were increased and persecution was ramped up, he was on board. A genocidal regime doesn't just need speech makers, doesn't just need people ranting at the podium, it doesn't just need politicians, it needs organizers, people who make plans and carry them out.
Eichmann was one of several senior Nazis to escape punishment after World War II. He vanished into thin air before being spotted in Argentina in the late 1950s. He was captured in secret and brought to Israel to face his accusers. His trial lasted for 4 months and was watched by millions around the world. Throughout, Eichmann claimed he was purely an administrator who played no direct part in the mass genocide his Nazi bosses carried out. I want to know if there is any truth to his defense, so I've come to Germany to start looking into Eichmann's story at a place that helped take him down.
That's the map. Nearly every spot here is a crime scene.
Wow.
Jens Rommel is a prosecutor at the Central Office for the Investigation of National Socialist Crimes on the outskirts of Stuttgart.
It's an amazing visual representation of the scale and scope of Nazi crimes.
And it's only a part of the scale.
So it must be a very daunting task for you then, because you've got all these crime scenes here, and you're trying to bring the people who are responsible for this to justice.
It's an enormous task for a small office like ours.
70 years on, Jens and his team are still chasing down suspected war criminals from the Third Reich. They have identified some 28,000 war crime sites. But with many of the men and women under suspicion now in their 90s, time is running out.
These crimes happened 7 decades ago, but your office is investigating these crimes today.
Well, of course, these are historical events during World War II. But what we are doing are current investigations because the defendants, some of them, are still alive. And it's also important for the victims or their relatives. For them, that's a current issue. Let's move to the card index room. They have 1.7 million index cards with names, locations, and military units.
1.7 million?
1.7 million. More than 700,000 names of defendants or witnesses.
From Hitler down to the lowliest thug, the details of their crimes are recorded here.
So I'm interested in finding out more about Eichmann. Do you have anything on him here?
Well, there should be a file concerning him, but first we have to check on the index cards. That's his index card. You can see we have a lot of cards concerning him, 8 in total.
8 cards. Is that unusual?
That's unusual because he was such a prominent figure responsible for a lot of victims. You have his personal data, Adolf Eichmann, and his actual position as the head of a unit in the Reichssicherheitshauptamt responsible for the killings and the robbery of Jewish citizens.
But as a bureaucrat who spent the Second World War behind a desk, he wasn't well known among Nazi hunters when the conflict ended.
In post-war Germany, the process of denazification undertaken by the Allies quickly became a lower priority than preparing for the coming conflict with the Soviet Union. So there was little appetite in post-war Germany to find and prosecute war criminals, especially those who weren't at the very top of the regime.
This allowed Eichmann, along with many others, to slip through the net. It really blows my mind. Hundreds of thousands of people have blood on their hands, and some of them are still out there. Eichmann, however, was one of the highest profile escapees to be caught. The arrest brought to light his astonishing story. To find out more about how he got his start with Nazism, I'm heading 620 kilometers northeast to Germany's capital, Berlin. Historian Dr. Stephanie Fischer is taking me to where Eichmann's career under Adolf Hitler would flourish. He actually went to the same high school as Adolf Hitler, is that true?
Yes.
Really?
Yeah, it seems to be kind of surprising for us, right? And we immediately start thinking, is there a connection? But it just doesn't seem that they met us.
Yeah, it wasn't like it was a school notorious for, say, radicalizing people or anything like that.
Not that we would know.
Born in 1906, Eichmann is 17 years younger than Hitler, so their paths never crossed in the halls of their high school in Linz, Austria.
Eichmann was a nondescript adult, and he had a nondescript childhood. He left vocational school without completing his course of study as a mechanic. He worked with his father, he worked as a sales clerk, incredibly nondescript and undistinguished.
And do we know why Eichmann became so interested in right-wing politics?
I think what he really finds appealing about is this idea of comradeship, of belonging, having a group of male bonding and being together and drinking beer and having common goals about how to change the world. And part of it is, of course, anti-Semitism.
So why was anti-Semitism part of his worldview?
As crazy as it may sound to us today, it wasn't something very uncommon at the time. Like right after World War I, among leftists and rightists as well, we would have a high degree of anti-Semitism. It wasn't something unique to the Nazi movement at the time, but the Nazism they pushed it to a new degree.
The Nazis' propaganda machine spouting Jewish conspiracies feeds right into Eichmann's pre-existing anti-Semitism. He joins the SS in 1932.
In 1933, Eichmann was sent to Dachau for paramilitary training, and he wasn't very excited by it. He requested a transfer to the SD, the security service of the SS, and a transfer to Berlin. He was ambitious and he wanted to rise up in the party, but not through the military route.
In Berlin, he is posted to the very center of Hitler's security apparatus. I actually have a picture of the original building.
Oh, let's take a look.
Yeah. So this is a photo of the building that was standing here before.
Exactly. So this used to be the headquarters of the SS. The security service, SD, Gestapo.
The SS was Hitler's security service, the Gestapo his secret police, and the SD the intelligence wing where Eichmann worked.
The SD is going to become one of the most powerful organizations in the Third Reich. It's there to gather every scrap of intelligence about every enemy. Now, those enemies don't just include foreign powers, they also include the other perceived enemies, such as Jews, communists, members of the church, Freemasons, you name it. Anybody Hitler doesn't like, they are a fair target for the SD.
What were his responsibilities?
He was very much involved in collecting data from Jews, but in particular in setting up emigration plans for how Jews should leave Germany. It's a major project. I mean, just think about it. This is where he proves to be a very good bureaucrat.
The Nazis' first attempt at removing Jews from Germany involved racist, restrictive policies that pushed them to emigrate. Eichmann was given the task of coordinating this effort through the SD, and he dove headfirst into the job.
Why is it that he is willing to work in an institution that is persecuting people? Like, why is it that he comes in, he gets a desk job, I understand that he wants to get away from the military service, but then he's persecuting Freemasons, and then he's persecuting Jews. Like, what is it about him that drives him to do that?
We can only read the documents we have, and the documents show that he chose to work there, and it was not something forced on him. So he made a clear choice to work in this department that persecuted Jews.
At his trial, Eichmann conceded that this was where he first honed his skills as an expert administrator, though remained adamant he was nothing more.
Das waren meine inzwischen mir angelernten Fähigkeiten auf dem Gebiet des Auswanderungswesens. So konnte ich sehr wohl jene Zeit auf diesem Gebiet als Spezialist gelten.
But the historical record proves there was much more to his story. In 1938, after Germany annexes Austria, Eichmann is posted to Vienna. He sets up the Central Office for Jewish Emigration and gets straight to work hounding the Jews in the country where he grew up.
He was an expert in what we would call putting the squeeze on people. Eichmann took steps, especially in Vienna, to compel emigration, to make life for Jews so difficult and so unlivable, and to have the threat of terror hanging over them, that they would have no choice but to find some way to flee the country.
Eichmann dreams up financial scams to seize Jewish property and freeze their assets. In May 1938, he boasts to his colleagues, "I have them completely in my hands. They dare not take one step without first consulting me." In just 1 year, Eichmann forces 100,000 Jews to leave Austria. It's an act no one should endure, not back then, nor today.
Dass keiner freiwillig ihre Heimatland und wo man aufgewachsen ist und ihre Umgebung verlässt.
I'm on a quest to figure out where Adolf Eichmann fits into Hitler's hierarchy of evil. I've come to Berlin, the city where Eichmann honed his skills overseeing the forced emigration of Jews from Europe. At his trial in 1961, Eichmann claimed he wasn't high enough in the chain of command to have any influence over what happened to them.
Denn dazu war mein Dienstgrad zu klein und meine Dienststellung zu gering.
But his success in pushing thousands of Jews out of Austria suggests otherwise. In fact, Eichmann and the Nazis were just getting started.
Eichmann's role in the SD is to identify ways in which the Jews can be got rid of. What we're looking at is forced emigration, plunder of wealth and property.
With Eichmann's help, from the mid-1930s onwards, Jews and other perceived enemies of the state were being persecuted to such a degree they had no choice but to leave their homelands, only to discover their situation became even worse.
There was no place for Jewish refugees to go. Many countries' doors were closed to them.
In one famous example, in May 1939, an ocean liner carrying some 900 Jewish refugees left Germany in search of a home. The St. Louis was denied entry to Cuba, the United States, and Canada, and forced to return to Europe. Over 250 passengers were later killed in concentration and death camps. I want to find out what fleeing that kind of tyranny feels like. Since the Second World War ended, Germany has become far more welcoming to refugees.
How long have you lived in Germany?
Ich bin seit mehr als 38 Jahren in Deutschland.
And though I can't speak to those who were aboard the liner, I can speak to people who've endured similar torment.
Ich bin ein Jahr nach iranischer Revolution.
Hamid Novzari is the director of Berlin's Society for Iranian Refugees, a group that supports newly arrived asylum seekers.
Die neue politische Machthaber im Iran und neue politische Lage war für mich unerträglich. Ich konnte nicht mehr aushalten und deshalb bin ich mal rausgekommen.
After the revolution in 1979, Iran devolved into totalitarian rule. Persecution of political opponents and minority groups became government policy. Just as Adolf Eichmann used the terror apparatus to push Jews out, Iran's leader, Ayatollah Khomeini, intimidated his people into submission. Many were forced to abandon the country of their birth.
Why do refugees come to Germany? What conditions are they fleeing?
Sehen sich gezwungen, ihre Heimat zu verlassen, sei es politisch, Hunger, keine wirtschaftliche oder Lebensperspektive, aber auch viele wegen ihrer Geschlecht, als Beispiel Frauen, Homosexuellen, als Beispiel Iraner, mehr wegen religiöser Diktatur, Unfreiheiten, Syrien, Bürgerkrieg. Wenn sie aus Afghanistan kommen, da haben die de facto keine Perspektive, entweder wenn sie aus Dörfern sind und so, werden die eventuell von Taliban und anderen Paramiliten.
In 2015, more than 1 million refugees fleeing civil war, political persecution, and economic hardship flooded into Europe. In response, Germany opened its borders.
How do you think Germany's history affects their attitude towards refugees?
Ich glaube sehr viel in Bezug auf die Vergangenheit von Deutschland, sich verpflichtet fühlen, sich für die Minderheiten, für Flüchtlinge einzusetzen, dass keiner freiwillig ihr Heimatland und wo man aufgewachsen ist und ihre Umgebung verlässt.
The kind of state-sanctioned persecution Hamid is describing resonates with Eichmann's work. In 1939, the Germans invaded Poland. This gives Eichmann an even greater challenge.
It becomes increasingly obvious that the more territory you conquer, the more Jews are going to be under your control. So when the Nazis do march into Poland, suddenly they've got 3 million more Jews. Now, what are you going to do with them?
Ever the problem solver, Eichmann's policies escalate from forced emigration to deportation. And one of his pet projects for what to do with the Jews was truly bizarre.
If you want to get to the roots of basically crazy Nazi thinking, look no further than the Madagascar plan. Big island off the coast of Africa. Nazis look at the map and go, well, why don't we just dump the Jews there?
Eichmann assembles a task force to plan mass deportations from Nazi-held Europe to the French colony. But the plans and practicality during wartime doomed it to failure.
It's completely insane. There's no infrastructure there, and of course, it makes no sense. If you're going to dump a load of people on that island, well, actually, you might as well kill them. Someone makes that mental leap, and that's what's going to happen.
This is a planned genocide through an industrialized mass murder program. It's deeply disturbing.
The next leg of my journey into Adolf Eichmann's story brings me to a villa in the leafy Berlin suburb of Wannsee. The setting is beautiful, yet the events that took place here over 75 years ago were anything but.
So this really is a stunning property.
Many people tell me that they are shocked by the contrast between the beauty of this place and the horrific history which we tell in our exhibition.
Today, this former SS guest house is a memorial site for European Jews murdered in the Holocaust. Hans Christian Josch is the director.
Now, this property is most notorious for a meeting that took place here in January 1942. Can you tell me what that meeting was for?
The basic idea of the conference was to coordinate government offices on what the Nazis euphemistically called the Endlösung der Judenfrage, the final solution of the Jewish question.
Undoubtedly, many conferences took place in the Third Reich throughout the war about how genocide was going to be enacted. The one that we know the most of, because the minutes of it were discovered, is the Wannsee Conference. This was a business meeting discussing, sales targets. What it looked like to an outsider. You had a map, you had numbers, and you had where those numbers were going to go. But of course, what all those numbers and maps represented was industrial slaughter.
This was where a small group of key Nazis agreed to the coordinated mass extermination of European Jews. Eichmann was among them. At his trial, Eichmann acknowledged he attended the Wannsee Conference, but claimed he played no part in that decision. He even went as far as saying he was opposed to the violence.
Ich hatte im Hinblick auf Juden damals nur jene Obliegenheiten zu erfüllen, die mit der Auswanderung zusammenhingen. Und zwar lediglich in fahrplanmäßiger Hinsicht, das heißt transporttechnischer Hinsicht. Aber ich hatte an keine blutige Lösung gedacht und nicht an eine solche gewaltsame Lösung gedacht.
Of all the claims he made in court, his fate hinged on this one more than any other.
So what was Eichmann's role in the conference?
Eichmann was the head of the desk for Jewish affairs in the Reichssicherheitsamt, in the Reich's main security office, and he was therefore in charge of transport.
All of the deportations from Nazi-ruled Europe to concentration and death camps in the East were overseen by Adolf Eichmann.
What was it about him that gave him such an important role in the Nazi genocide?
Eichmann took a lot of initiative, that he would actually interpret orders from his superiors very sort of flexible way, that he even had been reprimanded sometimes for being overzealous.
Eichmann worked tirelessly to maximize the efficiency of the train timetables. The gas chambers at Auschwitz couldn't keep up with the number of people he was sending. By 1944, even with the Allies advancing on all fronts, Eichmann continued to wage his own war against the Jews.
When the deportation of the Hungarian Jews started in spring 1944, he was actually overstepping Himmler's orders and sort of developed his own ambition in deporting as many Jews as possible.
As the Third Reich begins to crumble, he forces thousands of Hungarian Jews to march to the camps. When Heinrich Himmler ordered a stop to the death marches, Eichmann disobeyed.
Eichmann carried this out with great efficiency. He saw extermination as a task to be carried out, as a logistical problem. But we shouldn't forget, he saw it as a problem that he was happy to solve.
He's an enforcer, he's an administrator, he is the man who makes the Holocaust happen.
So it wasn't just a case that he was working in an office and overseeing or being involved in the genocide. It was something that he really was passionate about, that he saw it as his mission to try and eradicate the Jewish population of Europe.
He wanted to kill as many Jews as possible. This was his war aim, basically.
Inside is the evidence that tears apart Eichmann's defense. His own paper trail proves he was complicit in mass murder.
It's really chilling to be actually looking at the documents, because Eichmann was the one that put these minutes together. It's a list of the number of Jews in Europe that the Nazis have identified. We know that they managed to exterminate 6 million Jews, but this list contains 11 million, and that's because they've taken into account England, Ireland, Spain, Turkey. It just sort of shows the scale of what they were planning. It's deeply disturbing, just revolting.
Eichmann saw these people not as human, but as cattle, livestock being sent to the abattoir.
The largest deportation in 1943 had 1,758 Jews on one train.
1,758 on one train.
In my quest to determine Adolf Eichmann's place in Hitler's hierarchy, I've seen the evidence that proves he was complicit in genocide. Now, I want to know just how deep his commitment was to carrying it out.
So where are we?
We are at the train station of Grunewald, which is basically at Berlin's west end.
I'm with historian Yoav Sapir at the main departure point for Berlin Jews destined to die in Nazi gas chambers.
So the majority of Jews that were deported from Berlin were deported right where we're standing here.
Right.
Today, Grunewald Station is a Holocaust memorial. But during World War II, it was arguably one of the busiest stations in Europe, at least when it comes to mass murder.
So what are these here?
These are plaques that commemorate each and every deportation that left Berlin between 41 and 45. The largest deportation in 1943 had 1,758 Jews on one train.
1,758 on one train.
For 4 years, Berlin's Jews were rounded up, taken to Grunewald, and crammed into sealed railway cars. They were deprived of food and water and there was no sanitary facility other than a bucket. Many died on the trains themselves before they even reached the extermination camps.
What's so chilling to me standing on a platform in Berlin is that you see that we're not dealing with genocide on the battlefield. That obviously had been happening, but we're dealing with genocide that's been planned. It's something that the state has decided to do in the most practical way possible.
They outsourced the killing to these murder factories. And then, of course, the question was, how do we facilitate this transportation? How do we get the Jews from Germany, France, Belgium, the Netherlands, and so on? And that's where Eichmann comes in. That's where Eichmann is in charge in facilitating the kidnapping of families from their homes, forcing them onto trains, making sure that everything works well, the timetables, having the manpower, having the resources, having the trains on time to leave Berlin, to leave Paris, to leave Budapest, on the way to Auschwitz, for example.
At his trial, Eichmann was confronted by witness after witness. They all testified to his role in deporting Jews to their deaths.
Das Eichmann war derjenige, der alle Bestimmungen betrifft den Juden getroffen hat, vorgeschlagen hat und auch sogar durchgeführt hat.
פתרון סופי, אז הוא קיבל את התפקיד לבצע את זה.
Despite the damning words, Eichmann continued to deny his direct involvement in their suffering.
So sind an diesen Sachen eine ganze Menge Personen, wenn ich mal so sagen will.
One of the most confusing things about Eichmann was his seeming normality. He comes across, at least, as just sort of your everyday person. That is scary to some extent because it suggests that that normal people might actually be capable of this level of atrocity.
Eichmann approaches his role within the final solution with the utmost zeal. I mean, he takes his job really seriously. And that's what makes him such a terrifying figure, because this is a big logistical exercise. His department is quite small, it's just a handful of people. Yet together, under Eichmann's stewardship, they manage to get all these people, these millions of people, sent to their deaths.
Now that we're approaching the end of the war, this is the beginning of 1945. And so the numbers are very small. These are the last Jews of Berlin, those who were trying to survive while hiding.
27 of March, 1945.
At this point in the war, the Third Reich is all but finished. Every Nazi knows it, including Eichmann, but he was determined to finish the job he started.
The last deportation that left Berlin, 18 Jews who almost made it. And then, in spite of everything, were still captured, and by fanatic Nazis, they were being deported right before the Soviets encircled Berlin.
That's less than a month and a half before the end of the war in Europe. This really hits things home for me because they're losing the war. It's the final months of the war. They're about to lose it, and yet they are still deporting Jews to death camps.
Indeed, they were losing the physical war, but for some Nazis, the war against the Jews was more important.
Eichmann's profound commitment to the final solution is nowhere more apparent than on this abandoned train platform. But he'd soon find himself unemployed. The Germans surrendered in May 1945. Hitler was dead, and Germany lay in ruins. Millions of displaced people jammed the roads of Europe, desperately trying to get home. Hidden among them were Nazi fugitives in disguise, including Adolf Eichmann.
After the defeat of Nazi Germany, Eichmann was actually briefly captured by the Americans, but he got away using a fake identity.
For the final chapter in Eichmann's story, I'm turning to historian Tobias Freimüller.
So we're in Spandau right now. Yes, this is the neighborhood of Spandau.
He has the inside scoop on how Eichmann was finally brought to justice 15 years after the war ended.
And it became clear that the man was not his uncle, but it was, in fact, Eichmann himself.
I mean, that's just unbelievable.
Adolf Eichmann was a war criminal who evaded justice for over a decade. He'd hoped to live out his days in Argentina, but his capture in May 1960 changed all that. For the final leg of my journey, I've met up with historian Tobias Freimüller to find out how Eichmann's arrest played out and the impact it had on our understanding of what the Nazis did.
And this is actually the place where the synagogue was until it was destroyed in November 38. And what you see here is actually the names of the Jewish citizens of this neighborhood.
So these are the names of people that were deported?
Yes, exactly.
When the war ends, Eichmann's name is not on the list of top Nazis that the Allies are trying to track down, is he?
No, he's not. The Allies search for the top-ranking Nazis they know. His name is mentioned because it was clear from the very beginning that he was responsible for the deportations, but he was not seen as one of the leading figures who were brought before the court in the main Nuremberg trial.
In Argentina, Eichmann lived under an alias, but his wife and children still carried his name.
He spends, his days in Argentina drifting from menial job to menial job. He tries to make an Angora rabbit farm work. It doesn't work. He's working as a mechanic at a Mercedes-Benz factory. These aren't big jobs for a man who thinks, he deserves more.
Eichmann coped with his lowly place in the world by bragging about his past to other fascists. He also gave extensive interviews to another former SS officer turned journalist.
When he started giving these interviews in the 50s, the plan was to write a book and to publish a book where Eichmann would tell the truth about his history in the Third Reich, and he would publish it under his real name then.
One second, in the 50s he was going to write a book and he was going to talk about what he did and publish it. I find that extraordinary. But I suppose if you're that fanatical and you genuinely believed what you did was right, I suppose something that sounds as crazy as that now, to him, sounded like the logical thing to do.
Absolutely. He wanted to tell the truth from his point of view.
But it would be Eichmann's twisted version of the truth, no one else's. And these memoirs were never published.
So how was Eichmann ultimately apprehended?
It was in '57 when Fritz Bauer received a letter. Fritz Bauer was the state prosecutor of the state of Hesse, and he was known as one of the very few people in the judiciary in West Germany who would really fight for the prosecution of Nazi crimes. So he received a letter from Buenos Aires.
That letter was written by a Jew who'd escaped Nazi Germany in 1938. He'd just learned about his daughter's new boyfriend.
This new boyfriend turned out to be Klaus Eichmann, and it became clear that the man who lived with Klaus was not his uncle, but it was, in fact, Eichmann himself.
I mean, that's just unbelievable.
Fritz Bauer passed the tip on to Mossad, the Israeli Secret Service. During a daring operation in May 1960, agents kidnapped Eichmann from a Buenos Aires suburb and smuggled him back to Israel to stand trial.
It was a very, very special case. The trial in Jerusalem found a very huge echo in the media worldwide. It was the first trial at all who had such a focus on the Holocaust.
Eichmann's trial was watched by millions. The horrors inflicted on the Jews by the Nazis shocked the world.
Mein Bruder ist schon in Theresienstadt gestorben und meinen Sohn haben sie geführt nach Auschwitz.
We walked for 24 hours without food, and those who could not carry on were shot.
ראיתי ילדים מובלים להריגה. פעם אחת באו אנשי SS.
SS men arrived one morning and took the child away with them. Later, I learned that the child was thrown into the fire.
Until that point, I don't think that the world at large really knew what had happened. They knew there had been atrocities, they knew there had been killings, but they hadn't realized that the Holocaust, and it wasn't really called the Holocaust at this point, was actually this genocidal act.
You had survivors telling their stories in front of a global audience, and really for the first time, bringing narratives of the Holocaust and the systemic nature of persecution and genocide together in one place.
To have this laid out so clearly and to hear the testimonies and to see Eichmann in this glass box made a huge impression, especially on the younger generation, of course, who heard for the first time really what was the real nature of the Nazi crimes.
I think it's at the Eichmann trial where people really start to appreciate the mechanics and the machinery of the genocide. They realize that this isn't just something that just took place on a whim in camps. This was something that was organized, it was designed, it was literally built. Trains and timetables were literally drawn up, and people who were doing it were men like Eichmann.
The trial inspired Jews around the world to recall their own experiences of persecution and loss under the Nazis. It renewed calls for action to hunt down war criminals still on the run. It also forced Germans to confront their past.
So the German society had to learn that responsibility was to be found everywhere, within every bureaucratic system, within every family, and every soldier who took part in the war in the East had seen and properly done terrible things. And this took decades in Germany to really get through.
So the Eichmann's trial really opened up this period of understanding and taking responsibility for the atrocities that Germany had committed, and not just brush it under the carpet and say, oh, you know, Hitler and a few other guys were the people who did it all.
Absolutely.
What does Eichmann's performance at the trial tell us about him?
Well, it tells us pretty much everything that we know about him, finally, because there he was again and again making the argument that he only followed instructions, that he had to do what he did.
Eichmann played a fictitious role at that trial. He made himself out to be the little man. He made himself out to be the cog in the machine. He made himself out to be just the type of bureaucrat that all governments and indeed all dictatorships need if they are to function.
But everyone else in the courtroom saw right through him.
We know that he was very convinced of what he did. And until the very end of the war, he still tried to keep up the deportations, even if it was pretty clear that the war was lost.
Eichmann was found guilty on all charges and sentenced to die. He was hanged on May 31st, 1962. A coward to the end, he never once expressed remorse for his complicity in the murder of millions during the Second World War. Now it's time for me to figure out where this Nazi bureaucrat fits into Hitler's hierarchy.
Eichmann gets as close as I can imagine anyone getting to pure evil.
My travels to Germany have given me a much clearer picture of Adolf Eichmann's role in the Holocaust. Now it's up to us to find out where he fits in the hierarchy of evil. Using our unique system of playing cards, I want to determine where Eichmann ranks among Hitler's most wanted. So what was it about his character and abilities that gave him such an important role in the Holocaust?
You know what he was? He was good at logistics, he was good at organization, and he was good at following where those lines led to their most cruel and horrible conclusions without batting an eye.
Well, I think the thing about Eichmann that I notice is how bureaucratic he was, how administrative he was. Or at least he tries to portray himself in that way, as a quite normal person just going about his business.
And that was certainly how he portrayed himself in the dock in Jerusalem in the 1960s. Well, what you have to remember about Eichmann is that he was a Gestapo officer, and he had an enormous amount of power in determining the mechanics of the Holocaust. He's sometimes called the architect of the Holocaust. I think that maybe some other characters were actually deserve that epithet. But what he did do was he helped manage it, and he managed it very, very fervently.
Eichmann's bureaucratic diligence wasn't just about following orders. To him, his job was everything, and he relished in the administration of terror.
Eichmann was there right from the very beginning. He was up there, exploring the options, whether all the Jews should be deported to Madagascar, and ultimately as to where they should be murdered.
And when the Nazis escalated from persecution to mass murder, he went to great lengths to keep the mechanics of genocide running smoothly. The place that really struck me was Grunewald train station in Berlin, and this is where a large number of Berlin Jews were deported to the east to be murdered. And Eichmann was responsible for those deportations. But the thing that was most disturbing about that place was learning that those deportations were happening right up until the final weeks of the war.
It was not incidental. They were diverting resources to it. And at the very end of the war, they ramped up the extermination in order to make sure there wouldn't be any witnesses. In Argentina, Eichmann cavorted with ex-Nazis and would-be Nazis and was quite proud of what he'd accomplished. He bragged about how many Jews he was able to deport to extermination.
You're absolutely right. And he actually said once, I will jump into my grave laughing that I killed 6 million Jews. You know, this was not a man who was in any way ashamed of what he had done.
So it's really frightening to grasp the fact that what he was doing he believed was right, and he felt a conviction to the cause.
It wasn't so much that he believed what he was doing was wrong and did it anyway, like a psychopath would. He truly believed that his behavior was justified. Now, that doesn't necessarily make his behavior any less evil, but it is, again, scary to think that somebody can undertake immoral behavior and actually feel justified to do so.
Eichmann saw no moral quandary in the bureaucracy of genocide and his central role in it. That is what cements his place among Hitler's most hated disciples. So I'd like to come to a conclusion now of where you think he ranks in the Nazi hierarchy of evil. So Guy, we'll start with you.
Well, I'm going to put him down in the late teens, which may seem a little bit surprising considering he's this kind of household name amongst Nazis. Why? Yes, his personality is revolting. His anti-Semitism is pure evil. What he did was pure evil. But I think there would have been a lot of people who could have done that job in the Third Reich. So therefore, he doesn't really qualify for something much higher.
Anthony?
I think we all agree that Eichmann wasn't the faceless cog he portrayed himself as. But Eichmann gets as close as I can imagine anyone getting to pure evil. He didn't do this for fame, for money. He did this because he believed it was the right thing to do. His skill at that means that he has to rank a little higher, so I'm going to rank him at number 10.
I agree. I think he's necessary. I think his personality profile is required, and I think that his zeal demonstrates a pure evil. But I do, unfortunately, believe that that evil, that position, is replaceable. I rate him at 12.
So obviously the three of you have difference of opinion, but for me, I just can't get over the fact that he was responsible for the deaths of millions. I'm therefore going to agree with Matt's ranking, and he's at number 12. He's the queen of clubs. For his devotion to the logistics of the Holocaust and his unrelenting desire to deport all of Hungary's Jews to their deaths, Adolf Eichmann proves that even a bureaucrat can be responsible for great evil.